you may have heard a little bit about the concept of vaccine passports. So internally in the United States, there's been some talk of a vaccine passport, but there's been fierce opposition from the right wing in this country for vaccine passports, partially because they house a very large and unfortunately growing vaccine skeptic anti-vax or anti-mask movement. So there's definitely some politicking that's going on here about how vaccine passports might be used and things like that, and claims of revocation of freedoms and yada, 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 usual right-wing bullshit talking points. But what's interesting is that other countries, like the United States exists in an international system, and there is some conversation going on in other countries, including our neighbor to the north, Canada, that will require vaccines, vaccine cards to be present, or vaccine passports to be present in order to travel. So, for example, the European Union is in the middle of creating a digital vaccine passport. I think it'd be like a little chip, or like a card with a chip in it you can get if you can prove you've gotten a vaccine, and then you can travel. And this will be just kind of like a digital ID card. You'll scan it, be like, okay, like you can go through, you're fine, type of thing. And obviously there are privacy implications there, because a vaccine is health data, and that type of health data is typically protected, especially protected in Europe. So of course, this is back and forth, but there is increasing pressure on countries to implement some form of vaccine passports. So this presents an interesting dilemma for the Biden administration, for the United States as a whole, which is there is a ton of political opposition in the US to vaccine passports, but what happens if there is no way for Americans to travel without a vaccine passport, right? So you get to this weird place where, in order to interact with the remainder of the world, there may have to be an implementation of a vaccine passport for people to travel inside the US, because there may be, it may be forced on us from the outside, right? So anywhere that Americans might try and travel may ask for a vaccine passport. So if we don't have a vaccine passport to give them, effectively we're going to be shut out at the door, right? And my guess is, and I don't know how this is going to work specifically, but my best guess is that these vaccine passport checks will be done domestically by foreign officials who are in our airports and things like that, or by the airlines themselves, right? Who will be required by the destination airports to provide vaccine passports for everyone coming in. So imagine you're trying to cross the Atlantic, right? You're going to Spain for a summer holiday or whatever, and you go to get on your plane, and they ask you for the usual stuff: passport, boarding pass. But then they ask you for something else. They ask you for a vaccine passport. Well, if you don't have one because you're an American citizen and there's been no vaccine passport, or you haven't been told to apply for one, or there hasn't been an implementation of one, they're just going to turn you away. And if you're lucky, they'll refund your plane ticket and your hotel and your rental car and everything that you probably prepared trying to go for this trip. So the point I'm trying to make here by this example is that you essentially are at the whim of other countries for any travel at all, or else Americans are just going to be stuck having, not being able to travel anywhere else. There's also an interesting legal angle to this, especially when traveling within the United States is concerned. So in the Constitution, I'm forgetting what clause it is or what article, but there's a provision essentially that says that you as an American have right to free transportation between all the states. So, and I talked about this earlier on the show, earlier in the pandemic, about issues I believe I did, about issues concerning, whether certain states would try and keep people out unless they had a vaccine. This is a vaccine passport. The legal implementation of a vaccine passport between states may actually not stand up to constitutional muster. So it would be very interesting to see whether this is allowed to be done at the state level, because as you can probably guess, if you're familiar with US politics, is that all the states that are controlled by Democrats will likely put in place these vaccine passport requirements for interstate travel, and all the states that are controlled by Republicans won't, because their bases are partially anti-vaxxers, right? And that's not, it's just a fact. It is what it is. So, and of course, anytime that anything like this happens, of course, it goes to the Supreme Court and there's a whole big fuss over it. So it hasn't happened yet, right? Because these interstate vaccine passports haven't been implemented. But it'll be very interesting to see what happens if this is the route people go, because the truth is people want to be able to travel again, and they definitely want to they definitely want to travel internationally. They may also want to travel, between states. So in order to do this, we're going to have to find some system by which we can trust that people coming in to the country or into a different state are vaccinated, because people are going to want to try and get their lives back to normal. So my guess is there's going to have to be some sort of federal law about this based on the Commerce Clause about vaccine passports domestically. And obviously the federal government will be responsible for any law having to do with vaccine passports internationally. But to close this story out, because I've been rambling for a while now, essentially it does look like there's a possibility that by the end of the summer, vaccine passports may be a real thing in the United States, not because American politicians are particularly thrilled about vaccine passports, or their constituencies are, but because we exist in a global forum, in a global sphere, and in order to interact with the rest of the world, we may not have a choice. We may have to implement vaccine passports for our citizens to go abroad, for our diplomats to go abroad, and for things like that.